Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP John Paz, and for today's Who Is This Week, we have, of course, the two other men in the booth. First, we'll go to the man who signed in first, the doctor himself, Michael Jargo. Mr. J, how you doing?
You know, Paz, I very much enjoy doing these shows, but I think this is the first time that we are going to sit down to discuss who is the second greatest of anything, because number one is so far head and shoulders above everybody else. Like I literally sat down going through tag teams in all of professional wrestling history last night. And it's kind of like the music conversation, right? Like we can all agree Led Zeppelin is the greatest rock and roll band of all time, and we can argue over number two. That's very much how this list is going to go today, right?
Possibly. Of course, joining us, the third man in the booth, Hot Tag Ricky himself, RBV, Mr. HMG, Mr. TMPT. Rick, how you doing today, sir?
Doing wonderful. Jargo, that has the exact same has been on my mind since we kind of conceived this concept last week, and we wanted to go in the tag team direction. And immediately, and we always tell the listeners out there, those that are following us on social media, we love when they win, but they go with that gut reaction and they jump right to it. And we say, give it a chance. Let's run through the resumes. Let's have the discussion, and then we'll reevaluate. But maybe of all the shows we've done, this might be the toughest of those to not go with that gut. What we think we've always known, that the Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom, the greatest tag team of all time. But hey, I know the three of us, we've done our homework, and we're ready, I guess, to make some tremendous cases for the other greats out there. Wow, diving into this thing, some teams that I guess maybe because tag team wrestling is not so prevalent anymore that you just forgot how impactful they were, what they meant to you as a fan, and really professional wrestling as a whole. And I know we're going to dive into a bunch of them.
I'm happy that you bring that up, Rick, because as I was doing my list, right, I have number one, the Road Warriors. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 are all one team / another team. Like it's like tag team wrestling can only be as good as your tag team division. And you can be a really, really good tag team, but if there's not other really, really good tag teams for you to rival over the course of the years, really over the course of your entire career in some of these cases, you just don't make the list.
I agree. And just not inside a division and a promotion. What was tag team wrestling like in the landscape of all of pro wrestling? Now, before we kick it back to you to start the list going here, I always got my parameters I want to throw out here. Those damn devils over at WWE.com. And I guess now on the cock, I guess now there's a documentary out there about this, about tag team wrestling. They launched this thing yesterday, and so many from the wrestling fandom weighing in on this thing. I want to ask you gentlemen this, and it seems what really got me off tension is like this is really what everyone's kind of debating and arguing about, is if 3-man sets should be considered true tag teams. Is it what really set everything off is that the WWE named New Day number one.
Who? Did New Day crack anybody else's top 25? They didn't crack mine.
No, not a chance.
But how do we feel? How do we feel about the trios, and obviously the ones that created kind of that concept, or most prevalent, the Freebirds? To me, they should be included. I mean, they're still a team. They're in a match one-on-one. They still got a tag to get in. That's a tag team.
Well, just to set the stage here, today's obviously who is the greatest tag team of all time. So last week, or actually maybe a few weeks ago, we were talking, we should do greatest tag teams. And we finally kind of settled on this week. Then we see the WWE thing with Peacock and the WWE Network pop up. We're like, WWE, who is the greatest tag team of all time? I was like, wow, what perfect timing. Obviously, they went to print first. They got it out there first. We're going to be second, but still great timing. And as soon as I saw their list, I mean, holy crap. It might be the worst pile of shit I've ever seen in my life. Like the New Day number one, they wouldn't even make my top 100.
Okay.
Then, man, not even your top 100.
But looking at this objectively from a WWE perspective, New Day very well might be the greatest WWE tag team of all time.
How?
Well, I mean, when you're looking inside of the kayfabe world, I mean,
as far as the length of the title reign,
the amount of merchandise they've sold, the number of the title reigns. I mean, Kofi becomes world champion. Like New Day has been a very, very prevalent act on WWE television for what, 5-6 years at this point? Like, I can see where WWE could make this case, but nowhere else in the world of professional wrestling does New Day even make the list. But I mean, in a WWE mindset, I can kind of justify it.
And we'll pick apart a lot of the teams we'll go through, but I just wanted to go through their top 10 because I was dying laughing. New Day, number 1, horrible. Hardy Boys, I love, and they're number 2. I don't mind them on the top 10. I wouldn't put them number 2. Dudley Boys arguably could be in the top 10. I wouldn't put them. They have them. I think they had them number 5. I wouldn't have them. Edge and Christian, absolutely horrible. Should not be on any list anywhere. They're not even a real tag team. I know they're best friends, but never a real tag team. Don't even have tag team moves. Don't even have a tag team finisher. We'll get into that later. Hard Foundation, absolutely. LOD, without a doubt. Usos, shockingly made the list. New Age Outlaws, yeah, possibly WB-wise, maybe. Brothers of Destruction, not even a real tag team. And then the British Bulldogs, of course. Just to me, I was like, what the hell is going on? Who compiled this piece of shit?
What you got to do? Well, hell, who compiled this piece of crap? We know who's working for WWE. It's people that have no idea about professional wrestling. Now it's just come out into the general public, but they've been hiring like this all along. So here's what you've got. This is really compiled, and Jargo has nailed this thing. He has hit the mark right at the bullseye. This is a marketing ploy because when you read through the pitch for this thing, it's all about the cock. You can see all these amazing teams on the cock. So what content's available on the cock right now? It's all kind of modern, some attitude through Ruthless to today. You're not gonna. They don't have the territory stuff up there that was on the network yet. I mean, that's not readily available. So who are you going to go see? You're going to see the guys they got the merch for, and the guys they've got on their streaming partner.
And it would be very, very difficult for me to make the case that in a WWE, WWF context, that New Day haven't had just as good, if not better, of a career than the Legion of Doom. I mean, when you think of the Road Warriors, most of everything that we're going to talk about is outside of the WWF.
Absolutely.
Can I just say one thing to Jargo? How dare you?
I'm trying to be objective. And you know what? Actually, I wanted to bring this up because we've been getting a little bit of heat on Twitter. There is a difference between the greatest and your favorite.
Yeah.
You have to remain objective. I mean, for God's sake, I put Hulk Hogan over a couple of weeks ago, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you got to try to remain objective.
By the way, did you see Bret Hart won another poll? He got voted bestseller of all time.
Rey Mysterio not even on the poll, Paz.
I said you could vote other. You put in the bottom.
Come on, write-ins never win.
By the way, Ben today said Mysterio to me. I don't know if it was on air or off air, but he said Ben. Ben said Ray. So hey, you're in good company there with Mysterio. So New Day, we're going to have to mention because WB mentioned them. They wouldn't even, like I said, crack your top 25, Rick's probably top 50. They wouldn't crack my top 100.
But what's funny is all those other teams you mentioned, most of them are on my list, but New Day is not.
Right. The Edge and Christian are on your list for real?
Well, I have the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian, all three listed together.
But out of all three of them, I would say Hardy's arguably 1, Dudley's 2, or if you want to flip-flop them. Or if you want to flip them, and then you put Edge and Christian 3rd. There's no way that they're second or first.
You want to jump in there with that little trio there and maybe see where they go here? Because I do love how Jargo, he always has his connecting groups. As you said, you got to have that dance partner who's really going to elevate you. Of that trio, yes, history made TLC. I mean, they not only brought it to, well, I guess no pun intended here, the table, but they did it twice. They reinvented themselves inside of that gimmick match in such a short span of time. And even today, they stand out as the greatest of that gimmick. And I think when we look at the real tag teams inside of there, when we talk about the Dudleys and we talk about the Hardys, that connection where you have to give that hat tip to Edge and Christian they were that perfect complement. They helped elevate those other two to that next level when we talk about tag team wrestling.
Rick, you always talk about you're not necessarily a moves guy. You're not a what happens between the ropes kind of person. Edge and Christian took ass whippings between the ropes, but what they really added to that entire program was the character, right? Like they could go out there, they could cut a promo for 15 minutes. You surely didn't trust the Hardys to do that, and God knows what might come out of Bubba Ray's mouth if you give him a microphone for 15 minutes. I mean,
the Hardys, you know, even as great as Matt would get to, you know, become on the microphone, still finding his way. And the Dudleys were still making that crossover from extreme entertainment to sports entertainment. So you absolutely needed Edge and Christian to really make you to feel that emotion.
But they took their bumps
to get you invested. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one of those circumstances too, where, yeah, you know, I want the character. I want to be invested, which I was, because I thought, you know, between them, and especially, you know, growing up in the golden age of tag team wrestling, especially now where we're at in our fandom, to have something reminiscent of that, where it was actually felt important. You know, there was a spotlight. It was a centerpiece. Tag team wrestling was back again, even for that brief moment. You felt it. But yeah, inside of that gimmick, you're just looking for hell, and you're on the edge of your seat and you're popping with every big bump because it meant something. It wasn't for the sake of bumping and trying to pop you. It meant something.
Styles make fights, and these three all brought something different into those matches. And I think that's why it was so freaking good. I have them all the way up at number 3 on my list. This trio.
Well, now who represents though? Who do you have? I was going to kind of pause that there, which kind of, you said the Hardys above the Dudleys, which really surprised me. I would completely go the other way. I'd have the Dudleys a distant first from the rest of these two.
Interesting. I don't know. I always just like the Hardy Boys together more. Maybe the Dudleys better all time and the longevity stuff. It's just when they were together, I feel like they were over. I like the tag team maneuvers. I just love that they're selling. I don't know, something with me and the Hardy Boys, I thought it'd connect more. But obviously, longevity wise, Dudley Boys, you know, smoked them.
I think the roads traveled, that the Dudleys could do it in so many promotions on so many different levels and so many different styles.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you bring up the style. To me, that's the reason I have this trio so high, is because they completely changed tag team wrestling. Those TLC matches, like, you wouldn't see the Young Bucks out doing what they're doing if it wasn't for what the Hardys were doing inside of those matches. People wouldn't be taking the bumps that they're taking if it weren't for some of the bumps that Edge took during those matches.
Oh, hold on there. So you're saying that the Hardys influenced the Young Bucks?
Yeah, maybe just a little.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
Really at the core of it, the damn Hardys ruined professional wrestling.
Well, I mean, I feel like you could kind of make that case. You go back and watch those TLC matches, man. Look at where they were on the card. How does anything go on after those matches, right? I mean, you could make a case that TLC kind of ruined professional wrestling. Like, I don't feel like that's a far reach.
Am I crazy to say I didn't really like those matches? I mean, is that crazy of me to say?
No, I think it's that style too. As it says, you're probably sitting there looking around like, okay, what now? What, you know?
Well, and it's favorite and greatest, right? Like, I can not like a match, but I can still look back at WrestleMania 6, Hogan and Warrior, right? We talked about this. I don't think it's a very good match. You two absolutely love it. I cannot think that it was a very good match and still recognize the influence that it had in its place in history.
So we were talking about the Hardy Boys, and it's funny because I wrote them down, not really on my official list, but I wrote them down just to get your opinion on it. What about the Young Bucks, who claim that they're the greatest tag team today? And we've got certain, you know, people online and dirt sheets and stuff saying the Young Bucks are the greatest tag team the last 10 years and this and that. The Young Bucks even close to make your top 25 or even make the list in general.
You guys want me to leave for this part of the conversation?
Hey, no. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay, you want to jump in? And we do. We as Jargo said, we have to come with an open mind and look at things here. So I guess this will be the time. I will say something nice about the Young Bucks. Completely, I'm actually, to tell you the truth, I'm not a big fan of their Western work. I remember the first time I saw them in Japan, I thought it was somebody else working under the same gimmick, completely different. I really enjoyed their work when they turn up the intensity, and we got a more serious approach to the game, where it wasn't more, all the sophomore kind of slapping ass and fart jokes, kind of translate it into professional wrestling. Always thought that their business sense was incredible. They knew how to market. They knew how to grow their brand. I just wish and I think a little bit when they saw how the brand was growing and who that audience or that consumer was that was willing to seriously fork over that cash to them, that kind of swayed them in the direction they are now, where wrestling is simply cosplay to them. And that's what ultimately irritates me to no end with the Young Bucks. But still inside of this conversation, and I don't think they're anywhere near the top of this list when we talk about the all-time great tag teams.
I would have to kind of agree there, but just throwing them out there because a lot of people this is the greatest tag team today.
Do you guys hold it? And those people, I don't believe, are in any which way know their history, that are actually going back and studying tag team wrestling, that even attempt to understand the fine art of what tag team wrestling should be, because they've completely rewritten those rules. And they've got their own book that they're going by. Now, even inside of this list, how much weight do you guys put on in any of these who is that we do about that crossover? Could this team succeed in other eras? And I think, and I always kind of consider that a little bit like, would this talent that we're talking about is a great in the 80s, could they work in the 90s, the 2000s, the 10s, the 20s? And I outside of this modern era going, the last 10 years, I don't think the Bucks would survive it at all.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I have on my list of, I think I've got like 27 names on my list. And I have 3 current active tag teams. And none of them are the Young Bucks.
Okay.
The Young Bucks did not make my list. The Lucha Bros were closer to making my list than the Young Bucks.
Who are the 3 current tag teams? This is interesting.
The 3 current tag teams that I have on my list, I have the Good Brothers at the very, very bottom of my list, Machine Gun and Luke Gallows. I absolutely love their work in Japan. They would probably be higher if they would have just stayed over there. At number 15, I have G.O.D., the Gorillas of Destiny, Tama Tonga and Tangaloa, who Rick, you want to talk about those guys. I think I could put them in absolutely any generation over the course of professional wrestling, and they would still be the Gorillas of Destiny. 7-time IWGP World Heavyweight Tag Team Champions.
But what would their gimmicks be in each of those?
they basically be the Wild Samoans, right?
Right.
A more athletic version.
Yep. And at number 10, this will make my favorite Huckleberry very, very happy. The greatest tag team of the modern era, without a shadow of a doubt. G.O.D. can say there ain't nobody realer than Gorilla. The realest are the freaking Briscoes. Jay and Mark, those guys are fantastic. I want to see them. Give me, Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody versus the freaking Briscoes. Sign me up and take my money. I would watch that match tomorrow. Those guys are fantastic. Unfortunately, they've been stuck in Ring of Honor and they don't have nearly the exposure that they should have had over the course of the last, 20 years?
Yep. Almost
20 years. You asked me modern day dream matches that I want to see with active individuals. 8 out of 10 of those matches are going to involve the Briscoes for me. Absolutely love these guys. And I'm glad you mentioned them, as we were just talking about if these teams could cross over to different eras. Man, I am getting chills, goosebumps thinking about the Briscoes ripping through the territories back in the day.
Hell
going
yes.
From area to area. I mean, down there just ripping apart the Von Erichs, making their way through the South into Florida, back up the East Coast. Wow.
Could you imagine the heat Jay Briscoe would have got back in Atlanta, circa like 1984, 1985? My God.
But I think what would have been so unique with them is especially running through those southern territories, like they seem like one of their own, but they're northerners.
Mm-hmm.
So you could somehow play into that, man. I think that, oh man, that would have been incredible.
We talk about all the time, like what's missing in modern day professional wrestling? Realism, right? When you watch the Briscoes, that's who the Briscoes are.
Oh man, take me to the arena, take me to ECW, give me the gangsters and the Briscoes.
What about another current tag team, FTR? Where do they rank, if rank at all on your list? The only tag team to win NXT Gold, Raw, SmackDown, and AEW Gold.
I think they would fall. Now, we're talking about Raw talent, just looking at them purely as, man, you look at the blueprint of what you'd want. Again, talking about someone that could just excel. I think what really is a deterrent to FTR here is that they are in today's atmosphere of professional tag team wrestling. You put them anywhere else, we're talking about them near the very tip top of this list. But unfortunately, I just think that they've always been at the wrong place at the wrong time. And because of circumstance, it's hard to justify them being in the top conversation.
I have the Brainbusters on my list at number 12.
Love the Brainbusters.
And FTR would be like a 12B because I feel like I'm just watching a continuation of the same thing. Like to me, like I love FTR, but there's nothing that really sets them apart for me. Like it's all the same stuff that I've seen for 40 years, which is what we love about it. But if we're going to talk about FTR, then we have to also talk about DIY, because like those series of matches between those two teams, that's what really made FTR. Why
aren't Tully the Brainbusters so low on your list? I feel like they should be higher, meaning closer to number 1.
There are some really good teams on this list. There's some really good teams.
Better than Arden Tully. Are you crazy?
Well, I mean,
crazy right now.
No.
There's some good teams. There's some good teams out there, Paz.
I love them. I'm just throwing up. They're in my top 5.
What was it? What was it with you? Because I think we're going to be on the same page here. What was it that really that pulled you towards them?
Realism, promos, wrestling ability, getting the other guy over, always was believable. And then like just the selling factor. I love, like, they're like chicken shit heels. They cheat, then they're assholes. Then they're gonna kill you. I love that, like, turn of the switch, like, oh no, but they're tricking you. Obviously they're heels, and then boom, they'll get you by the knee or whatever, and then they're just vicious. There's no being soft about it. They were just cutthroat. They're like exactly who you want to be, even the way they dressed, the way they looked, the way they carry themselves, the way they hold the belt. I just, everything about them was like what I would want in a pro wrestler. And I always would say, like, okay, Flair's great, the Horsemen are great. Those two guys are what kind of make the Horsemen. I mean, they like elevate the Horsemen. They're the workhorses. They're the best, or top 5 for sure.
See, for me, Ric Flair is one of the things that actually bumps them down my list. Like, it's weird because I always felt like Flair was such the alpha inside of the Horsemen that it made everybody else take a little bit of a step back. And for me, one of the things that you have to consider when I'm looking at these lists is the push, right? And while the Brainbusters were great, they were the guys that ended up getting their asses kicked a lot in the end too.
That is true. They were kind of like the not the guys you beat up, but they were kind of the sellers, if you will. I mean, they were the guys that are definitely going to take a loss, not necessarily a loss, but they'll take a beating. Now, I just wanted to go back because obviously the first name I wrote on my list, not necessarily going to be my pick for the greatest tag team of all time. And we mentioned him obviously earlier. WB has them at number 6. LOD, the Road Warriors. I think when you initially just in your head say, oh, greatest tag team of all time, they automatically are first. Just even when I wrote it down, I'm like, oh, greatest tag team, Road Warriors. So just funny that WB puts them at 6. I don't know if that's because Animal was part of that lawsuit. I don't know, like the thinking of there's some sort of like cheap heat, like, oh, we're going to knock them down a peg, when that's absolutely insane. I just think that's so funny. Like the Dudley Boys be ahead of them. Animal, who is was such a great guy. So funny. He told me a great story So everyone talks about, oh, Bully Ray, so tough, so this. So he called Animal like crying because Animal jokingly, as a rib, said on a podcast that the Dudley Boys aren't even in the top 10. They're not even close to as good as the Road Warriors, just as a rib, because he knew Bully was listening and knew he was going to say something. So he was like all upset, and he called him like, come on, man, how could you not do this? He's like, dude, I'm fucking with you. He goes, I respect Dudley Boys, but they're no LOD. They're no Road Warriors, which I'm sure Bully Ray would probably agree. But it's just funny, like, that's him. He's a joker. He's a wise ass, a ribber,
Yeah, but
to
you know,
me-
on the flip of that,
To me,
Bully's-
they got to be considered, though. I mean, Road Warriors to be number 6 on that WB list is a joke.
Bully's a businessman, though, so he knows that when a Road Warrior speaks, fans will listen. So if he's downgrading the Dudleys, that means Dudley merchandise isn't selling.
Yep.
That's still on Shop WWE, and that cuts into his pocket.
Yep.
So hey, it's a little bit of a motive for Dudley to say, "Hey, man, don't be saying that shit out loud." You can say you're number 1, but say we're a close second or something like that. But man, you talk to Road Warriors when they came out. And I don't, if you guys remember when you came aware of them when you were a kid, they were terrifying just themselves. And you knew something bad was going to happen. And I mean bad 2 ways, like something terrifying, something awful was about to happen to someone. And then something bad, something awesome was about to happen. And, and they took, this is the hotbed of tag team wrestling. I think we could take just that small sample, that era right there, and compile a list that would blow away any other list when we talk about greats. But the Road Warriors, they took that and elevated. I mean, they were a draw. They were main eventers as a tag team. Where the hell else have we seen that anywhere?
Yep.
Across the board through the different generations. No, it was them. And I know,
and Rick, not
can
just
draw.
main event, they were the biggest draw on the card, and they did it in every single territory that they went to. I mean, that's the thing that blows my mind. Like, you could have somebody that was big down at World Class, and then they go up to Kansas City and nobody know who in the hell they were, right? The Road Warriors, before national expansion was a thing, were global. It didn't matter if they were in Tokyo or if they were in Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Absolutely. And I think it's crazy because now, there is like a fine art when you're putting together your promotional material for wrestling events. And especially, because it's, kind of today with the indie scene is comparable to the territories. And as you had people traveling, as Jargo said, this might be a hot commodity down there in World Class, but are they going to know them over here in the Carolinas? So we got to build that up. So even now, and, one of the main things, that some advice that I had passed to me, he said, make sure, you're always putting the credentials on there. And even if they're not a Shane Taylor, but, Shane Taylor, I got to make sure that Ring of Honor, and just like the ROH, you got to make sure it says wrestling so that people know what the hell it is. And all those, but even your local guys, put their names so that people are familiar when they show up to your show, who the hell these individuals are and all that. Hey, the wonderful thing. And the other thing, spell out the name of your promotion. So many people are like, oh, PWA. Yeah, that's in our bubble. No one knows what the hell that is. You got to say, it's live pro wrestling. Wonderful thing about the Road Warriors back then, you didn't even have to put wrestling, live pro wrestling, anything. Just put Road Warriors on a poster. Show up at this time. This is how much it is to get in the door. You're going to have a line wrapped around the block. That's how incredible they were. There was such a draw in that sense. And you're right, Jargo, it was global. What was going on with these guys. Now, when we look at this WWE list, do you think it is down? Because we did talk about, and I'm sure it went both ways. It's kind of skewed. Okay, we got to get, it's just like the WWE Hall of Fame. We like recognizing big names in wrestling that are going to draw for us, but we're going to take care of our own first. Is it because of I guess, I don't want to say disappointing, but when you look at their overall career, maybe a little bit of a lackluster, because that was probably their downtime, that especially during that first, and when they came back and all that crap was on the back end of their career and they're trying to get over these other teams. But that first run there, when everybody wanted the Demolition feud, and that kind of fell flat because Demolition was on the way out. I think that's what they're kind of looking at there.
Yeah, inside of a WWF context, the Legion of Doom were never the Road Warriors, right? I mean, and most of it was because it's pretty notorious at this point that Vince and Bucky don't like tag team wrestling, right? Like that's the problem, because there's not a good way to shoot it for television. So the Road Warriors were never used to the potential that they should have been used inside of the WWF. Like the Legion of Doom stuff versus when they were just tearing through the territories. And like you said, Rick, even on a global scale, I mean, the thing was they had that look, right? Like number one, they were two like tough looking dudes who cut their hair all crazy that are like, 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 300 pounds. And then they're going to paint their faces like that. Like you'd be walking down the street and see a Road Warriors poster and be like, what the hell is that? And where do I pay to see it?
True. Another team, just to keep it rolling here, that I feel like was on that same level that could muscle up and have muscled up and kind of beat up the Road Warriors a little bit when they had their matches, some great matches. And they drew globally. They drew in WCW. They drew a little bit in the WWF, but WWF obviously not a great, especially at this point, tag team home. But what about the Steiner brothers? Very, very high up on my list. Love me some Steiner brothers.
Jargo, you want to jump in on this one first? Or
Yeah, Mr. J.
You asked me who do I have above the Brainbusters. Well, I have the Steiners above them. I absolutely loved the Steiner brothers when I was a kid. The combination of personalities between Rick and Scott Steiner were intriguing enough. But I mean, like they had the Michigan branded jackets. Like they came out and it was like, oh, these dudes look legit. Like they are Michigan Letterman. That dude's wearing headgear. And oh my God, look at Scott Steiner. Like what kind of... Vince McMahon's having a steroid trial. Like, my God, let's talk about Scotty Steiner, right? And then, like, who would have known that was the smallest that we would see Scott Steiner, right? When he was young and spry and almost working like a cruiserweight style. I mean, people thought Rick was going to be the big money out of the Steiner brothers. Nobody thought that it was going to be Scotty.
I don't know, because when you looked at those two, when you look at the charisma and the athleticism, obviously I'm not want to take anything away from Rick Steiner, because man, when you talk about that vibe that you got from the Road Warriors, like something was going to happen. You got a guy with all the credentials, the collegiate wrestler, but you just knew, man, something was a little off. He gets barking like that dog, and he's about ready to snap. He's about to go off and bite into somebody's rear end there. I don't take it away from him, but man, you look at Scott Steiner, then he felt like a pro wrestler. And it just, man, I remember the first few times seeing the Frankensteiner.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, blown away that, that was one of those things you'd never seen before. And then again, what kind of compliment, when we're talking about the Road Warriors too, you get guys this size, and then when you see them get up top and you see them fly, and you're just more in awe, and it's incredible. And it's funny that you're talking about who had the potential there. I believe it was Pritchard talking on his podcast, and this is going back early seasons, that they actually had talks. When the Steiners came over in one of those rumbles, they were looking for a breakout star, and they talked about giving it to Scotty.
Really?
And giving him a push. I mean, I don't know how serious or how deep it was, but he said there was an afternoon by the pool where they spent a good time talking about these potential breakout stars. And there was, of that conversation, they talked about Scott Steiner shocking the world and winning a rumble.
The breakup of the Steiner brothers was like super sad to me. Like it was almost Rockers level, right? Like, he joined the NWO. And like, I was so mad at Scott Steiner. I was pissed. And then he became Big Papa Pump. And I was like, okay, this is the best thing in wrestling. Like, come on. Like, the guy was incredible. He was just incredible.
You mentioned the Rockers, on your list.
The Midnight Rockers do, in fact, make my list. Not higher than the Brainbusters, though. Nope. I kind of got them middle of the road. I have them like right around like 14, 15. And we can kind of talk about the Hart Foundation at this point too, right?
Absolutely.
Because I feel like the feud between Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, that's where it really got going. was watching the Rockers versus the Hart Foundation. And those are some of my earliest memories of like really getting into tag team wrestling. Like both of those teams were just incredible. And the style differences, you had the high flying and the neon, and then you had the crazy of the anvil and the cerebral hitman. Like it was perfect. It was like the perfect undercard. You're 7-8 years old and discovering tag team wrestling. I love the Rockers and I love the Hart Foundation. To me, still, when people want to talk about the Hart Foundation, my brain immediately just goes to the tag team.
You know what's funny there is, and I love why we have these conversations, and it really gets you going on these, is to the WWE, to what WCW had, the Hart Foundation and the Steiner brothers were very comparable in the styles.
They really were.
In what each one of them kind of represented.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I know, the look's completely different, but the philosophies, the fundamentals, just talking about them is
the cerebral athlete and the crazy guy.
Yeah. That you do, and it all came together. They were so amazing that everything kind of meshed and gelled. But, the Hart Foundation perfectly represented the WWF style, where the Steiners were, more of that traditional, what WCW had going on. But they were like the mirrors of their own brands of one another. That's kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, I love the Midnight Rockers, man. When I first saw them in AWA, you're like, man, this is something different. This is something unique. And I know now, a lot of the modern fans would be like, well, what's so cool about that? Well, that was different back then. And when they came out, it was something special on the card because you didn't see it up and down. And they had their own unique style. Certainly always wowed by the Rockers. Loved watching their matches. Unfortunately, I probably wouldn't have them in my top 15.
But weren't the Rockers really just like kind of a continuation of Rock and Roll and Midnight? I mean, like they kind of just tried to combine both Rock and Roll and Midnight. So Rick, to actually follow your theory, right? The Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express ruined professional wrestling because, if it weren't for them, they wouldn't have had the Rockers. And if it weren't for the Rockers, you wouldn't have had the Hardys. And if it weren't for the Hardys, you wouldn't have had the Bucks. Like it's really, you can follow kind of the lineage of this tag team.
Well, and maybe, we look at why, we think, okay, why now there has been, Cornette's talked about meetings between the Midnight going up, and talking with Vince, and it not really anything really coming of it. The Rock and Roll Express never they did a little bit of that crossover stuff with the NWA, but nothing of seriousness. I wonder if that really because Vince was like, you know what, I already have that myself in the Rockers,
right?
And he had that young, hipper version.
It was a younger, more athletic, better looking version of you.
What's kind of funny, Marty Jannetty the other day took to social media. It was outside of a barber shop.
Saw that.
And he posted, hey, I'm looking for my old friend, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. I hope to God Shawn Michaels doesn't show up. He was right outside the mirror, but it was pretty good. Finally, oh my God, something's wrong post from Marty.
Is Rock and Roll Express on both of your lists?
Yes, on mine.
I have Rock and Roll / Midnight number 2. I have them behind the Road Warriors. The feud between Rock and Roll and Midnight defined tag team wrestling to me for the better part of like 10 to 15 years.
When I think of best tag teams, like work rate wise and like in the ring and having the best matches, causing riots, having crazy reactions, immediately think of Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express. Both incarnations of the Midnight Express, Lane and Eden, and then Eden and Condrey as well. Just I absolutely love. Plus Cornette, throw him in the mix.
Well, I was going to say when we got to the Midnight, and Teresa, I really threw it out there at the opening show to count 3-man teams here. Would any of the Midnights have the success or be in these conversations without Jim Cornette?
No, because the real feud was Rock and Roll versus Jim Cornette. Right. Like right. Kind of like the Hulk Hogan versus Bobby Heenan thing. Right?
Well, that would be the big payoffs, when they finally got their hands on Cornette.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it even worked, in the few times that they had to turn face. And it was because the crowd really started rallying behind Cornette.
Yeah.
That's true.
That seems insane to me now.
So Midnight Express definitely high up on the list. Rock and Roll Express obviously very high on the list. That might be one of the greatest tag feud of all time. If you want to talk about what is the greatest feud, that might be the greatest one. If you want to go match for match or sellouts in Mid South, and then even do it again in NWA. I mean, whew,
Yeah,
just crazy.
That feud in itself, not to the level of the Road Warriors, but that feud with those teams, and it was selling out buildings.
And Dusty and Flair apparently had to have a conversation with the guys about it because they were outdrawing them. They were doing the B show and they were doing the A show. So Dusty had to sit them down like, guys, we need to put you on the A show and blah, blah. Oh, but we're selling out here. Well, you're kind of making us look bad. So, yeah, which is in a way awesome because it's like, wow, we're outdrawing Dusty friggin' Rhodes and Rick friggin' Flair. So it just shows you how great that feud was.
Yeah, the feud is what made both of those teams. Of those two teams, I would put Rock and Roll above Midnight.
Absolutely. I agree. That's, going back when we asked about, the trifecta there with ENC and Hardy's and Dudley's, who stands out. Rock and Roll stands out. Even today, people talk about the Rock and Roll where they might have to be more familiarized with the Midnight.
So you mentioned the Hart Foundation before, and they definitely have to be big time in the list considered, and even on the WWE top 10 list, whatever, they have them at number 3. So they're definitely considered. But what about, we're talking about LOD, Hart Foundation, that time period. What about Demolition themselves? We kind of mentioned them in passing. Do they get any sort of recognition? They were the longest running tag team champions of all time until New Day beat them. But Demolition was there during a great high point of the tag division. I mean, they were locked and loaded with a shitload of good tag teams at that point. New Day arguably had no real teams to wrestle. So you can just kind of throw that out there. So you're like, okay, you didn't really wrestle anybody that great. Demolition had all this great competition and were able to be tag champs. I know longevity-wise, it's not going to be as long as a run, but work rate-wise, unbelievable team. Over-wise, unbelievably over, and a hell of a theme song.
Demolition was my favorite tag team for a very, 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 very long time when I was a kid. And now, as a grown-ass man, to go back and watch Demolition, I kind of watch it a little bit differently, right? Like, because now I get all the S&M references and whatnot that, like, as a kid, I totally just completely missed. And it's like, wow, these guys were so far ahead of their freaking time. And then you kind of remember what was going on, and they were basically a knockoff version of LOD, right? Like they were the WWF version of the Legion of Doom. I think that's what Vince was really trying to create for Demolition. And I think it was incredibly successful. When I look at the WWF tag teams of the 80s that I would have loved to have seen in other places, Axe and Smash. But part of what knocks them down the list is the third man. Once Crush came into this thing, Demolition was just over for me.
Yeah, and they weren't as over with the crowd either. They lost their luster a little bit with Crush. I know they're trying to create another star, and they knew what they had with him with a ton of potential, but he did not work out that well with the group for sure. It was not that great as far as when he joined.
Well, wasn't in large part, Axe was just winding down.
Yeah.
Just career. I mean, he we talk about individual tag team wrestlers. I mean, he'd been doing it for a long time. And arguably this is his greatest success. I would think, he would talk about that. And yeah, Demolition, man, for being I don't want to say spoof, but an obvious knockoff. And they've admitted to it. They wanted to try to capture some of that same lightning that the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, were catching. But to be this successful with it, and it's okay, great individuals. You take other art and make it your own, and that's what they did. And they could have easily just, okay, you know what, we're gonna go out here, run this for a little bit, collect our money. We know we're a duplicate, a copy of this huge successful run that's happening parallel to us. Let's go out there and make this our own. And I love Demolition from the very get-go. The moment that they debuted, I mean, they were just a wrecking ball.
Ricky, you talk about take the gimmick and make it your own, right? Which I absolutely agree they did. How do you suppose the pitch for that gimmick went? Yeah, man, we're gonna send you out there in S&M masks and spikes and
Well, if you
black
look at
leather. Yeah.
if you look at the movie The Road Warrior, which is arguably the greatest movie of all time with Mel Gibson, awesome movie. You got the Lord Humongous character who they're based
And
off
I
of.
think that's where it all
And then-
came from.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly where it comes from. But also the Wes character, which is the Road Warriors, the LOD. So there's the two different characters based off of one movie, which is really cool. You don't really see that too much as far as copying, but man, what a cool movie to kind of steal and copy from.
Well, it's perfect for professional wrestling, especially in the time, you know.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just
And obviously the Lord Humongous, the wrestler too, which was played by Jeff Van Camp and Sid and a bunch of others too, which based out of that movie too. But Demolition Man, if they had more longevity, they had the longest title run up until the New Day, but if they had more longevity, I think, or maybe if Edie was younger at the point, maybe we'd be looking.
Yeah.
because even when he took that role on, they knew that he only had a couple years left, in the tank, but he believed in it, through the pitch. He wanted that part of it. And he was one of those old school journeymen, though. He's like, those opportunities are far and, few and far between, and you got to take every one that you can get. Now, it's a little bit difficult to find out there. A lot of people just maybe that aren't familiar with it, but you gentlemen know for sure that the Smash we know wasn't the original Smash.
Randy Colley.
Yeah, because he was a Moondog, correct? And they thought he'd be too recognized. So they made the pivot, and it's just those are one of those things that you always think like, what would have been in it, man? I just don't think you would have had that.
And they
that
changed the face
success.
paint too. Actors face paint. I mean, they changed everything. What about Demolition Blast? Did he get any love or no? All the other Demolition that they did on the Indies? No.
Yeah,
No
well,
love for those guys?
I've seen. Well, hell, I mean that's the same. You could go to the go to Wikipedia, look up Midnight Express, and there's a list of about 20 people that were somewhere on the Indies. Hell, we were talking about LOD. We didn't talk about Road Warrior Heinrich or anything like that.
I did. Right. What about another team during this period, which was awesome and way ahead of their time and kind of set up a lot of wrestling as far as even singles competition, but the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid.
Yep, I got them on my list as well. I don't think it's any big surprise that I am a total mark for the Dynamite Kid. And Davey Boy was just kind of like the perfect tag team partner for the Dynamite Kid. Like they were the prototypical tag team to me. You have the one guy who's a bit smaller and he's more athletic and he takes the ass whipping. He makes the tag to Davey Boy. Like it all makes sense, right? It was great. And Matilda's was awesome.
What about another team? Just throw it out there. The Harlem Heat.
Harlem Heat also on my list.
Nice.
And another one of those teams that I had above the Brainbusters. I freaking loved Harlem Heat. And that's not even a plug for, Stevie Ray TV over at Hameen Media Group.
I was gonna toss their names out a moment ago. Jargo, I'll see you're above the Brainbusters and I'll up the ante here a little bit here. I have Harlem Heat above the Steiner Brothers.
What?
I have them right next to each other. So
I've not would say that they're light years ahead or anything like that, but yeah, I love Harlem Heat. I remember seeing them, the Ebony Express in Global. Even then, those were one of those people. Like the first time you see them, you're like, damn, these guys are going to be special. There's something very incredible about them.
Well, I mean,
I don't know if it was politics that kind of held them down at certain times, but damn, I always thought they were incredible. They had amazing success. 6-7-time champions, and
10 time.
10 time.
I mean, to go back to the Bulldogs, right? Like that became the recipe for tag team wrestling there for a very long time. You have the little guy and then you have the big guy. Booker T was the little guy. Crazy. I mean, my God. Like Harlem Heat, man. And they're another one of those teams that, aside from like the racism that has ran rampant through professional wrestling for the better part of 50, 60 years, I'd drop Harlem Heat into any tag team division at any time, anywhere in the world.
Speaking of a little plug for Stevie Ray TV, it's probably over on his YouTube page. Go find us. We'll find the entire episode. It's a tremendous listen, but he actually sets everybody straight on the WCW debut, where they were known then as Cain and Abel, and they had him come out in chains. And and everybody jumps all over this thing. Oh my God, it's a slavery thing. Well, no, the thing was that these two guys had just got out of prison. They had the jumpsuits. They were so fresh out of prison that they didn't even get the cuffs off of them yet. Now, and he even admits it's like, man, we all thought it was going to work and all this. What everybody kind of the oversight is that probably wasn't the best idea to pair him up with Buddy Parker.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so the visual here of coming out there with the Southern aristocrat, plantation owner.
Kane and Cole.
Who was booking that? Who was booking that?
Who would have been on that one, Paz?
That was not Sully as of yet. Technically Flair at that point.
Kane and Cole, that's what it was.
So Flair was in charge. So Sully was on the committee, and a bunch of other guys were on the committee. Mm-hmm. Mike Graham. A bunch of other guys, but he was the head of the snake. And so Sid, oddly enough, helped bring them in, which is just kind of fascinating. We
had Kane and Cole. Thank God they didn't have a manager with a K name.
Jesus.
What about Killer Carl Cox? But moving on, tag teams. We mentioned the Fabulous Freebirds before. Mentioned very briefly, but they got to be in the list. Wild Samoans, are they another team that's on your list?
Samoans are on my list. Like the Wild Samoans were terrifying, right? Like you didn't necessarily know anything about Samoans when you were a kid and you would see the Wild Samoans, but you were pretty sure that like they were just absolute freaking savages that had to be contained after the matches, like, taken back and put inside of a cage and shipped off to the next town because they weren't actually real human beings. They were just absolute insane savages, and it wasn't too far off.
I'm just going to throw out some other names, just awesome tag teams, not necessarily number one or top 10 or top 5 on my list, but just some awesome tag teams. The Fantastics, I thought, were just excellent. Such great workers, definitely deserve a nod. More old school, I guess, for the fans. But
I think, and I heard Cornette say this, what really hurt the Fantastics is they came around just after the Midnight Express. If they would have beat the Midnight Express to the scene, they might have been the team we're talking about. True. But just because they were, in that same era, the same areas, and they were just behind them, that it kind of hurt them.
So just to kind of throw out some TNA teams real quickly, Beer Money, America's Most Wanted were great ones. Wouldn't be considered top of my list, but just throw them out there. Then if you want to go kind of more old school, the Funk Brothers got to be considered. The Von Erichs got to be considered. The Valiant Brothers got to be considered. The real original Briscoe brothers, Jerry and Jack, have to be considered. The Fabulous Kangaroos are always thrown out there. If you look at your history books and start reading up on them, always considered one of the greatest tag teams. The Mongols were a great tag team. The Assassins, of course, Crusher and the Bruiser. Just to throw out some old school tag teams, just to throw out some more names that I think should definitely be considered. I know Vince McMahon loved the Valiant Brothers for sure.
I'm surprised you didn't have the Minnesota Wrecking Crew on there, Paz.
Minnesota Wrecking Crew. Oh my God!
I was just going to wait for my opportunity to throw them out here as we're talking about some of those old school names. That's who I had.
Wow.
Ready to go for you.
All the names. How the hell would I forget that? Yes, absolutely. The Wrecking Crew, the precursor to the Four Horsemen. They've got to be thrown out there. Tag teams that I always talk about with my buddies that aren't officially tag teams that are awesome teams when you put them together. Hall and Nash, the Outsiders.
Damn, you guys are reading my mind. I was going to say,
had a good run
as
a tag team, and the greatest tag team of all time, the Mega Powers.
I was wondering how long it was going to take you to get Hulk Hogan on this freaking show, Paz. I wondered, but ladies and gentlemen,
we got a record here. It took him 53 minutes to mention Hulk Hogan.
I do have to concede. I did have the Mega Powers on my list, though, at number 21. I also had the Outsiders on my list at number 5.
Okay. I love it. I have them way up on mine, too.
When you look at the influence and what they meant to the industry, It's hard to argue that there was anybody more influential than Hall and Nash. And again, we want to talk about, the little guy was Booker T. The little guy was Scott freaking Hall.
6'8", 290. Yeah, crazy.
Now, in mentioning Scott Hall, I also have to mention Kurt Hennig, because Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig in the AWA were freaking fantastic. Love them as a team too.
For sure. I just want to throw out just a couple other teams that always get thrown out there. I don't necessarily have them high up on my list, but New Age Outlaws, kind of mentioned before. The Los Guerreros, just because they're such a great team. And the Miracle Violence Connection. Love them, Gordy and Williams together. I'm trying to think if there's any other tag teams that we didn't mention. Not that they necessarily would be in the contention of being the greatest, but just deserve the nod. Anybody on WB's list, probably not. But as far as the teams we need, is there anybody we forgot?
I think two here.
Okay.
One, we had talked about the modern Briscoes, Jack and Jerry Briscoe.
I mentioned them. I said them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had them as you were going through there. I don't know. Maybe what if, as Jargo said before, a difference between greats and favorites. But one hell of a destructive force that was one of the teams that maybe you're terrified of, you're in awe of, that were so good together and meant so much to WCW during their run. The tag team of Doom.
Ooh, nice one.
It's a good one.
What about you, Doctor?
The only one I'm going to bring up is probably the greatest Gaijin tag team ever in Japanese professional wrestling.
Hanson and Brody. Those two freaking guys. I mean, aside from the Road Warriors, they might be right behind the Road Warriors for drawing the most money. It just wasn't here. Those two guys murdered the entire country of Japan for the better part of a freaking decade.
But before there was Kong versus Godzilla destroying.
Yeah,
it was them.
So RBV, who do you think is the greatest tag team of all time? I mean, we're kind of saying who, but could this be a possibly clean sweep? Are you going to go different? Are you going to change it up? Are you going with the New Day, which is what you told me off air?
Those are lies. Those are blatant lies. You SOB. Those are lies. No, that's no disrespect to New Day. Yeah, gentlemen, you always come in with that open mind and you want to hear things out. This one, it's been a great conversation, and I hope people found a new love for an appreciation for tag team wrestling. Go research it, go watch some of the classics there. But I am going to leave as I arrived, and that's shoulder pads. Remember when I was in sixth grade, parents had to drop $45 a pair so that me and my buddy could go as Halloween, Hawk and Animal, Road Warriors, Legion of Doom. But number two, and I think that's very important that we each throw our number two, because that's going to be the conversation coming out of this thing. I got to go Rock and Roll Express.
What about the Doctor? The Doctor of Style.
Well, I would love to say that the Fashion Police are the greatest tag team of all time, given my love for the recently released Tyler Breeze. But
keep wearing them Young Buck shirts like you know anything about fashion.
Clearly, the answer is the Road Warriors at number one, and I'm with RBV. Number two, the Rock and Roll Express.
Man, I went into this thinking that I'm gonna pick somebody different, because the Steiner Brothers, favorite and greatest, are different. The Steiner Brothers are probably my favorite tag team of all time. I'll go here for the clean sweep. The Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom, as the greatest tag team of all time. Number two on my list, I will put the Midnight Express.
Very nice.
I love them. Yes, just because I love them that much. Then I'll probably go Steiners, then Rock and Roll Express, and then probably the Hart Foundation, just because of who I.
It's interesting. Let's go around the horn here real quick, as we're under the 60 minutes. So, your favorite tag team, personal favorites?
Steiners, for sure.
Wow,
got to be the Steiners for me. Although I love Midnights.
Well, Jargo, while you contemplate there, mine's real easy, man. I always loved them, man. The Blondes, Austin and Pillman.
Yeah, the Hollywood Blondes are, I think they're the only team that I had on my list that we didn't talk about today, but I had them all the way down right above the Good Brothers.
I'll tell you another one I really loved, Territory Days, because I was a Smoky Mountain mark, man. I love the Thrill Seekers. Jericho in Storm. They were green as hell when they were there, but is there any guilty pleasure teams that you would get laughed at today? Like that as a kid, you're like, hey, I kind of like this.
You know, it's funny we didn't mention them, but this is not a joke, not the joking part, but just to mention them. Heavenly Bodies, they got to get some consideration. They were so damn good. I love them. I know they took a lot of the midnight and a lot of the tag team news, but man, they were so damn good. Love me some Heavenly Bodies.
I think what would have hurt them is because they weren't Cornette's greatest creation.
Yeah.
Or, his, because they would always just be a distant to the midnight.
Now, guilty pleasure, the Nasty Boys, no doubt about it.
Oh, nice, man. The old armpit move there.
Or the Bushwhackers.
Man, okay, sheep herders. I mean, like, can we get the Bushwhackers before they were the Bushwhackers and put them somewhere on this list? Because those guys, holy crap.
I don't think the Bushwhackers would want to be there before the Bushwhackers because that's where they made their money.
That's true.
Man, you talk about a lovable group, man. Yeah, the Bushwhackers.
Man, it is really, really difficult for me. I guess I'm probably gonna have to go with the Rockers. But God, I would have right on their freaking tail. I love watching Tama Tonga and Tangaloa, especially in trying to work a heavyweight style inside of this modern era that is professional wrestling. It's really hard for me to go against the Gorillas.
All right. When I was, let's see here. Let's see, like what is that? 4th grade. How are you in 4th grade? Like 9?
Yeah, like 10, something like that.
9, 10.
10, yeah.
All right, I'll admit this here on Who Is Two-Man Power Trip.
Natural disaster.
I liked, when I was a kid, I liked the dynamic dudes.
I like them now, maybe.
I don't know. I don't care. But now my favorite story is the one that you hear because they saw through them right away, especially in the South. 2 old guys that had no business being around skateboards, but I couldn't see that. 9-year-old RBV just thought it was kind of cool, I had my skateboard that I couldn't ride either, but they were out there trying and they could wrestle, so that was fine. But now the best story is you hear down, I think it was at the Omni or something, maybe across the South, is arenas chanting, "Johnny sucks Shane's dick."
Yes, and on that note, I think that's a great way to end it. That's an awesome story. But let's get to the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website tmptempire.com and of course patreon.com/tmptempire. Dr. Jargo, what do you got?
You can find me across social media platforms at Not Jargo, Destino Pod, hittingthemarks.com, Hameen Media Group. You know what they say, to steal a line from George Carlin. If you got a podcast, I'll fucking be there.
Nice. RBV, what do you got?
As we record here, we're jumping in July. It is July 1st, 2021. Or just after 5 o'clock as I record, but this is going to be hitting you on the 2nd early on. So I will already be balls deep into an incredible 4th of July weekend of podcasting, recording, using this glorious voice of mine. But no, you're going to miss the live run of it, but catch the rerun. I'm going to be on the RTW rerun with Rad Rob. And of course, 4th of July weekend, we are talking the history of hot dogs. It's all about America's birthday and America's favorite eat, the history of hot dogs. And of course, that's a lead into Sunday, July 4th. Going to be coming at you streaming live on the Hameen Media Group YouTube and wherever the hell will host us. But yes, it is the live watch along, the worldwide watch along for the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, man. Looking forward to that. We have a great time with it. So make sure you catch us there. Sunday. In between then, Jargo and I are going to be in the HTM studios with another episode of Hitting the Marks. We're going to be doing that tomorrow morning. I'll be at the track Friday night using the voice, APW wrestling Saturday night. Shit, man. All over. But you can keep up with everything that's going on, the eats, the podcasting, and all the other treats. Keep up with me across all social media at The Real RBV.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. We'll see you right back here next week for a little Who Is right here on the 2-Man Power Trip. See you next week.